Welcome to the J Report. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are joined today by an author. Her name is Margot Webb. She's the author of this book. It's called Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. An incredibly compelling read, a read that will really make you think about how we, as Jews of the 21st century, interact with modern Germany. It's a constant challenge and struggle. We are decades out from World War II. Germany is Israel's best friend, but yet feelings are complicated. And that's what Margot wrote about in her book. It's my honor to meet you.
Thank you
so very much. So let's start from the beginning, Margot. You've allowed me to announce that you were born in 1927.
Through no fault of mine.
That is right. And you were born in a town near Leipzig, Germany, that was in the former East Germany. Tell us about your family in the 1920s and 30s.
In Halle, which was considered a very cultural city, my life was different from that of American children insofar as I always had a nanny. And this nanny would bring me up, tell me what kind of manners to have, and it was a huge pleasure when I could be with my mother.
And was that because you came from a fairly well-off family?
A very wealthy family.
Right.
Yes.
I believe your grandfather started a department store and your father took it over. Is that right?
No, my great-grandfather started it.
Okay.
My grandfather and my father took it over, along with apartment buildings, whole streets of shops, and they even owned the city building where they made the laws and so forth. Wow.
So how was life for Jews in Halle? I understand before the war, the city was about 1% Jewish, which was standard for Germany. Germany was 1% Jewish, not like Poland, which was 10 or 11% Jewish. So how was life for Jews? I mean, you were young, of course, but I mean, do you have a recollection of how it was before Hitler's ascension in 1933?
Before Hitler, I wasn't even aware of the fact that I was Jewish.
Yeah.
I went to a school, my first few years in a school, a French school. And
so you were really cultured. I mean, that's amazing.
Yes, and I loved school. I had friends.
Can I tell you, I've spoken with many Jews who were German and lived in the 20s and 30s. They loved Germany. They loved Germany. I mean, your uncle lost his life in World War I fighting proudly for Germany.
Yes.
It really is, I mean, at some level, it's a footnote, but it's something to recognize that German Jews loved Germany. It was their homeland.
It is.
So after Hitler ascended, life got difficult for Jews, including in Halle. What do you recall?
I recall 1933.
Oh, okay.
Because there were billboards everywhere. Vote for Hitler. Vote. Now, you know, he wasn't voted in. Every time I saw it, I thought, if I could vote, I'd vote for Hitler, yes.
Oh, so you
I was a
didn't
little
have,
girl.
right,
I was 6 years old. What did I know?
Right.
And my mother and father would say, shh,
Right.
don't talk so loudly on the street. And I said, why not? And they said, wait till we get home. And when we got home, they said, you are a Jewish girl, and Hitler does not like Jewish girls. So when you're on the street, don't talk about Hitler. Don't talk about things like that.
And by the way, you were speaking German. You were not speaking Yiddish, which the Jews of the East were speaking. I mean, this was a high society family.
No, I was actually taught a prejudice against Yiddish
I've heard that.
people.
I know.
We thought that they were the maids and
Of course. Now, your nanny not Jewish, I presume.
No,
Yeah,
oh
not
no.
Jewish. So by 1938, even though your grandfather had been president of the synagogue, your grandfather and father were active in the business community, owned buildings, ran the department store, you had to get out. You had to get out.
It was a slow moving. The Nazis came to my grandfather's house and said, you have X number of days to get out, but during that time you have to tell us everything that's in the house, every item. And it was a huge house. So, of course, my father helped him. And I remember the last thing he wrote down was, we forgot a pencil. It's lying there on the floor. Every item. And I said, that pencil, why don't you just throw it in the garbage and don't tell anybody that? Oh no, they wanted it. So everything was taken away. All his businesses, all his money, gone.
When we come back, I want to ask about that fateful decision to ultimately leave Germany and who in your family was able to leave and who in your family stayed. It's an uplifting yet simultaneously devastating story. We are speaking with Margot Webb. She is the author of this book, Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. We'll be right back on the J Report. Welcome back. It's the J Report. We are joined today by Margot Webb. She is the author of this book, Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. Margot, your grandfather's properties, I believe your father's properties, were nationalized by the Nazis. There was a decision ultimately after 5 years of clear torment that at least some of the family, the Levine family, had to leave. Who left? Who stayed? How and why?
My grandmother died in 1934 of a natural death. She had a heart attack.
Okay.
My grandfather had had a mistress.
Okay. Not uncommon for the era.
And my grandfather and his mistress left Halle and moved to Leipzig.
Okay.
But they had no money.
Even though they had been wealthy?
They took everything.
Oh, I understand.
Money, possessions,
Right, I understand.
everything. They had enough to live on for a few months. And they decided that the money they had would go to buy guns. So his mistress was allowed out in the street and talk as loud as she wanted to.
She was non-Jewish?
She was Christian.
Got it.
And so she bought 2 guns. And she came back to wherever they lived, and they put 2 chairs opposite each other, told each other how much they loved each other, and on the count of 3, she killed him and he killed her. It was a suicide.
What year did this happen?
I would say 1936.
It's unspeakable. It's unspeakable.
Right.
So your family, after their death, what happened? Your immediate family?
My mother, my father, and I moved to Arnstedt,
Where your mother's family
where
lived?
my mother's mother and father lived. And next door to them lived his sister and her husband. There was quite a family. They were in the same business together. They raised Arabian horses.
But let's do go to 1938. and let us know how your family left.
My cousin, I should say my mother's cousin, who lived next door, married a man from Amsterdam. It was a business arrangement so that he could get all the family to go to Amsterdam. My grandparents had 2 visas to go to California from my grandmother's brother who lived in California. And they discussed it, and they decided to give the visas that my grandmother got from her brother, give them to my mother and to me. My father got his own visa, and he left a year earlier to settle in America, to see if he could find work, a place to live, so when we came, we would know where to go.
It's a miracle you got out. It's a miracle.
He went to New York,
Right.
and the Jewish welfare told him, do not stay here. We don't want so many Jews in New York because of the situation in Germany. So find another place to live. And she looked at the map of the United States, closed her eyes, and pointed at a place, and it was Worcester, Massachusetts.
She meaning the woman in the welfare agency?
The social worker at Jewish Welfare.
And so you wound up in Worcester, Mass.
No, my father couldn't find any work. He had never worked. He had been sitting in his office ordering things for the store.
So when you arrived with your mother, where did you and your father and your mother land?
Erie, Pennsylvania.
Because?
Because he had a job there.
Which was?
Which was supposedly cutting men's ties in a factory. My father was very nearsighted, and he ruined more ties than he made. So he couldn't keep that job. He was brought up as a gentleman.
Of course.
He didn't know what to do.
So as we conclude this part of the discussion, what happened with your parents? Were they able to acclimate to America?
My mother acclimated quickly.
Okay.
She didn't speak a word of English. She had little dictionaries this big, would go to the market, say just a minute, and look up whatever she wanted. And she made many friends, both American, and there were quite a few German Jews in Erie.
What about your father?
My father never acclimated until he had grandchildren. Then he decided he would love football. He would learn everything about football because he had 2 grandsons. But that's as far as it went.
When we come back, I admit we're going to fast forward many decades.
Okay.
Because we've gotten the background of your life in Germany. Later in your life, you found yourself back in Germany. And that is what the book focuses upon, is your return to Germany and the ambivalence that you have and still have surrounding the nation that was once your beloved home. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on the J Report. We're back on the J Report. I'm Brad Pomerance, speaking with Margot Webb, the author of this book, Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. And we're going to talk about that word enemy. We are fast forwarding, about 6 decades. In the interim, you got married, had 3 children. You've outlived a few husbands. We won't go there. In the early 2000s, you decided to visit a cousin, Ilsa, in London. And that was a fateful visit. It was a visit that changed your life.
Yes, it was.
Tell us about it.
She had come to London from Halle, where she too had been born. on a children's transport.
Kinder transport, yeah.
And she became more British than the British.
Of course.
And she married, and she had a huge family. And they were all related to my father, and I didn't know any of my father's relatives.
I see.
And that's why I went to London. But she insisted that we're so close to Germany, let's go back to Halle together.
And you had never been back to Germany?
I'd never been back, and I didn't want to go.
Which is not an uncommon sentiment amongst German Jews.
Right. I was afraid I'd fall apart, you know, and I didn't want to go. And she said, well, my dear, I'm older than you.
We're going.
She was a bridesmaid at my parents' wedding.
And I would mention, sadly, the grandparents that gave the visas to your family, they perished in Sobibor.
They were murdered in Sobibor.
So your older cousin takes you to Germany.
Took me to Halle, and it was very strange for me. We were there more than one day, and she said, fine, you really want to go to Arnstadt.
Oh, you wanted to go to Arnstadt for sure.
If I had to be in Germany, I wanted to go to Arnstadt.
Why?
Because I loved those grandparents more than I did.
No, you didn't really know. I mean,
Yeah,
your grandmother died in 1934. On your father's side, your grandfather
There were
committed.
no nannies taking care of me. It
Oh,
was
interesting.
My grandparents and my parents, and I loved that town. So she said, let's go. And we went there, and from the moment we entered a little hotel in that town, I thought, I'm home.
I'm going to start crying. I mean, it's so emotional to hear that. I understand that.
There was something cooking in the kitchen. It was such a small hotel. I could smell it. It was familiar.
Can I tell you, I'm of Polish descent. I was not born in Poland, nor was my father. His mother was. And when I have visited Poland, it's hard to even say it without starting to cry, I have had that feeling that I was home. And I wasn't even born there. I understand what you're saying. I do.
I know.
Yeah.
But we were still in the lobby when I felt that. And a second after I had that thought, I thought, shame on you, you bad human being. How could you feel at home in the town where your grandfather was dragged out of his house on Kristallnacht, where they were murdered in Sobibor? Who are you to act like that? You're not a little girl anymore. I was 68 years old, and I felt like a little child.
But I get it. I get it. I absolutely, I get both sets of feelings. You can simultaneously feel both. And I absolutely appreciate that you simultaneously felt those.
It was, you know, I was getting hysterical.
Did you break into tears? I mean, or was it all internal?
Not in front of the owner of the hotel.
Right.
Who later turned out to be a good friend.
You've become friends.
Yes. The first morning that we woke up in that little hotel, I told my cousin Ilse that I needed to be taking a walk alone. And what I wanted to do was to go to the house where my grandparents had lived. It was a house that had a name. It was called the Christophorus House. It's 4 floors. Had on the outside of the house a painting of Saint Christopher.
Wow.
And on his back, he was carrying the baby Jesus.
And this painting was there when your grandparents lived there?
It was their house, but they were not allowed to take that down because it was also a state historical property, and it was 500 years old.
Wow.
The walls in the house, from room to room, were 6 feet wide, so it was difficult to overhear what the adults were saying when I was a little girl.
So when we come back, I want to ask about your visit to this historic mansion,
Okay.
and how this visit turned into many visits. I will try to get through the next part of our interview without breaking into tears, because this is very emotional to hear, and I'm so honored that you're willing to discuss it. We are speaking with Margot Webb. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on the J Report. Welcome back to the J Report. It's my honor to reintroduce you to Margot Webb. She is the author of the book Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. Although I'm not sure if they're your enemy, they meaning modern Germany or Germans. Let's talk about your first trip. And you arrive in Arnstadt, your maternal ancestral home, and you go to the name of your grandparents' home?
Christophorus
Yeah.
house.
Tell me about when you arrived at the Christophorus house.
Well, I told my cousin Ilse I wanted to be alone, and I wasn't sure if I still knew the directions to the house. But it was only almost like crossing the street. And before I knew it, I stood in front of the house, alone. My grandparents didn't come out and say, "There you are, look how big you got. You're almost as tall as I am," my grandmother would say. They were gone. There was a feeling of death. And I stood there for a while, and fortunately nobody was walking on the street at that moment, or they would have asked me, "Who are you?" And after a while I turned around and walked back to the hotel. But I was shattered.
Have you ever knocked on the front door and gone inside?
Oh yes, they made apartments in there, and
So you've been inside the home. How was that for you?
well, I knocked on the door of one apartment, and a young teenage boy opened the door, and he said, "Excuse me, but who are you?" And I told him, and he said, "My mother and father aren't home, but I'm sure they would approve of your coming in."
Oh.
So I went in and I said, "You made it lovely." It was a nightmare. It was horrible. It wasn't, my grandparents weren't there.
But, you know, it was a moment of humanity for a young German boy
Yes, it was.
to welcome you.
It
you know,
raised my hopes.
Yeah,
It did.
You know, I have visited my ancestral homeland in Poland,
Right.
and my experiences have likewise been positive with non-Jews.
Exactly.
Yeah, not everyone has those experiences. Fortunately, we have had positive experiences.
I went back to the hotel, and I thought I'd just sit there for a while and think, but my cousin Ilse was bored, and she said, "Let's go, show me the town." And so we went, and I showed her this little store and that little street and all this. And suddenly we reached a church. It was one of the big churches. And she said, "Let's go in." I said, "Oh, we shouldn't go in a church." She said, "Why not?" And she opened the door and walked in. So of course I followed. It was ice cold in there. It was snowing outside. It was so cold. But at the end of a long prayer hall, there was a woman near what we would call the bima.
Right, I got it.
And she said, "Let's talk to her." And I said, "I'm not going to talk to anybody. You can do it." She said, "Fine, I will."
Did you both still speak German?
Yes,
You still have your German.
yes. And so we went to the end of the church, and there was this woman wearing 3 coats, 2 pairs of gloves, and a hat. And she said, "Oh, welcome, welcome." And we said, "Why are you here? Why isn't the heat turned on? Why are you standing here like this?" She said, "Well, we have tourists who come to visit, and I'm selling books." And on a table next to her were a pile of small books. I said, "Could I look at one?" And she said, "Go ahead." I picked it up, and it said, "What happened to the Jewish people who once lived here, the citizens who once lived here?" And I opened it up, and there was the name of every Jewish person who had lived in Arnstadt, what had happened to them, where they had been killed, or where they had moved to, or
Including your
if they committed
grandparents.
suicide,
Including your grandparents.
including my grandparents. And I kept looking through it, and my name was there. And it said that I had moved to San Francisco, and that I was fine, and that I was in school.
Oh,
I said,
my
"Who
Lord.
wrote this book?" She said, "My husband is a minister of this church, and he did not participate in the Nazi life." I said, "How's that possible? Hitler would have thrown him in a concentration camp." "Well, no, he had had such a reputation as a spiritual leader that he was allowed to live his religious life without Hitler interfering." And so secretly, he studied and went into archives and found every single Jew who had been in Arnstadt.
How many about?
Not very many, a few hundred. I mean, we had a temple,
It was a small town.
so it was about 100,000 people. So my cousin Ilse said, "This is just fascinating. You must come to our hotel for dinner tonight." Oh, I thought, I was so embarrassed. How could you ask somebody?
Oh, I'm sure she was touched.
Yes, she was. And when Ilse said, "Come to our hotel for dinner tonight," she said, "I accept even in the name of my husband," because she said, "I know that tonight he has no program. This is his night to be home with the family. So we'll be delighted to come for
Wait,
dinner."
her husband was alive?
Yes,
The author of the book was alive.
yes.
And did they know Jewish people? I mean, was there...
No, they'd never seen one.
Margot, when we come back, I want to hear about that dinner.
Okay.
And then I want to hear about your return, because you have been back to Germany many times and spoken with Germans. And I want to know why you named your book Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. You have touched me. I cannot wait to continue the conversation. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on the J Report. Welcome back to the J Report. I'm Brad Pomerance. I'm so glad you're still with us for a very moving, heartfelt, emotional interview with Margot Webb, the author of the book Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. The minister and his wife grace you with their presence at dinner. The minister's alive. The author of the book is alive. The man who celebrates the Jews of Arnstadt. Tell us about that dinner and how you've remained friends with those. Are they both still with us?
We went back immediately to the hotel to tell the owner that we were expecting this minister and his wife for dinner. He said, "No, you mean he's really coming here?" Oh, everybody.
He was a celebrity
Cleared
in town.
Oh, he cleared the dining room. He made sure that there were white tablecloths and crystal and this and that. And he ran out without his jacket on into the stores to buy this and that to make a special dinner. Because this minister was so beloved and so famous all over Germany that...
Oh, all over Germany, not just in Arnstadt.
No.
He was well known.
Right.
Well, for good reason. I mean, this man is,
Yeah.
he exemplifies the best of humanity.
Right. And I said to the owner, who I called Herr Schmidt in the
Mr. Schmidt, yeah.
book, I said, Herr Schmidt, we are the first Jews the minister has seen. He said, you're Jews? Oh my God. He said, you're the first Jew I've seen. You're really Jewish? Yes. Well, it was a Friday night.
Oh, Shabbat.
Yeah. And they came at 7 o'clock, and the whole hotel dining room had been turned into an expensive-looking place. He had used everything he had, the Herr Schmidt.
Yeah.
And so we sat down, and he served us wine and this and that. And the minister said, excuse me, but we're not yet ready to eat the main meal. It's Friday night. It's Shabbat.
I'm going to start crying. I just...
And he brought out a challah.
This is the minister.
This is a minister.
He brings out, look, I'm tearing up. I mean, a minister is bringing out challah for, I can't talk.
He had to go to it. When his wife came home from the church with all her coats on, she told him about the dinner. So he took a train to the next town where they made challahs and brought it back. And
what a magical evening.
I mean, we were just, I felt like I was paralyzed. I
feel
didn't know what
paralyzed.
to do. So he said, would you please stand up? I'm about to give the prayer. He goes, Baruch atah Adonai.
I can't.
He said, I learned that a long time ago.
Oh, my God.
We have to excuse ourselves before God.
I can't.
I tell you, it was a moment I'll never forget. Or Ilse, who now died. She was quite
I'm
old
sorry.
lady. I wasn't young either. I was 68. But during this day we had in Arnstadt, the minister said, would you please come to the church and talk in our all-purpose room? And I said, my German is like that of a little girl.
It's okay.
How can you ask me that? And Ilse said, you're going to do it. Stop with this wishy-washy behavior of yours. So the minister said, my daughter, Annika, will be standing next to you.
In case.
She speaks English, and if you lose a word, she'll help you. So I went, and that room was full. There was a Jew talking. They could see a Jew in the town.
Right.
And I had prepared a little speech.
This was the same trip?
This is the same trip. But when I looked at these people, I thought, no, I'm going to say what I really feel. And I said, you're going to have to excuse my German because I sound like a child. And the reason is because of you. Because you kicked me out of my country. You killed my family. You made me lose my language. So if you want to hear me talk, I'll talk the way I can. And it worked beautifully. At the end, I said, are there any questions? Only one woman raised her hand. She said, Margot, don't you recognize me?
You're going to kill me.
I thought, this can't
Oh, no.
be happening. I said, how could I recognize you? The last time I was in Germany, I was a child. I was 10 years old. She said, well, the last time you were in Germany, I was 10 years old. We were schoolmates. I sat next to you. And she said, sometimes I would go to your grandmother's house with you to do homework, and your grandmother baked cookies for us with our initials on the cookies.
Do you remember her? I mean, did you remember her?
The speech stopped. People got hysterical. They clapped. They said, this is wonderful. We embraced. I thought, this is just too wonderful to believe.
Did you remember her once she reminded you?
Yes, but as soon as she said her name, Hilda, I knew who she was. She always had long blonde braids that she wore in the front. And I said, what did you become? What did you do? Get married? No, she was a heart surgeon.
Just a heart surgeon.
Just a heart surgeon. So I looked forward to seeing her again.
And that's what we're going to talk about when we come back. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on the J Report. We're back on the J Report speaking with Margot Webb, who just was reunited with Hilda, her childhood pal from the 1930s in Arnstadt. So Hilda asked you to come back, and you did many times. But have you seen Hilda again?
No, I haven't.
Why?
And I looked for her. I asked people, have you seen her? Sometimes I'd get an answer, yes, sometimes, no, she's moved out of Arnstadt. I didn't get any clarity.
But you did learn some information that was a bit upsetting.
Yes, the minister said to me she was involved as a medical person in the war with Nazis, and she embraced the Third Reich.
That must have been devastating for you to hear.
But after this short visit to Arnstadt, I thought, I owe something to the children or the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren of these Nazis, or these kids are going to become just like their parents were. And I came back to the United States and told my husband that I would want to go 2 or 3 weeks each year to Arnstadt and work with the young people and any old people who wanted to work with me. I was willing to talk to them, but
And
not
you've
as
done
a
that.
friend.
Oh, well, I mean, as a friend, but you were going to be
As
honest.
a
Tough
lecturer.
love. Yeah, tough love.
But with the children and the teenagers and the young mothers and young fathers, you know, I worked with them. We did plays. They made plays out of some of my books. And the whole town would come to the plays. Standing room only.
I want to ask you, and you talk about your trips back in the book, Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. Why is that the name of your book?
The name is Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. They decided to make an audiobook out of one of my books. And one of the actors was an old man who played the part of my grandfather. And he was supposed to say to 2 little girls, would you like some cookies? And the way he said it was, would you like some cookies? Yeah or nein? So we said, we'll try again. Say, would you like some cookies, children? He tried again, and it was the same thing. And he said, I have to sit down. And he sat on a bench and began to cry and cry and cry. And we said, "What is going on?" He said, "I've never had anybody talk to me like you want me to talk to these children. My parents were strict. They never loved me. They sent me to the Hitler Youth, and nobody was kind to me there. And from the Hitler Youth at age 17, I was in the army. I was a Nazi in the army, forced into it, and of course, nobody talked to me like, 'Would you like to have some cookies?' I can't do it because nobody's ever done it." So somebody from the show had a cookie and said to him, "Would you like a cookie?" And he said, "I'm going to try it again." And lo and behold, the camera was on him, the sound, and he said, "Would you girls like some cookies?" And after that, of course, everybody in the cast was congratulating him. And from then on, he started going to church on Sundays to our minister. And one day, he sat next to a lady, and the next Sunday, he sat next to her again and again and again. And they started to have dinner together. And before you knew it, they were engaged. Although they were old people, he had never been married, and they got married. And people asked this lady, "What attracted you to this old man?" And she said, "It's his voice, his loving voice, when he asks if I want anything."
In your birth town of Halle, there was unfortunately an attack on the synagogue that's there. It was not the original synagogue. That synagogue was burned in Kristallnacht, the synagogue that your grandfather had been president. 2 people were killed in that attack. And I want to get a sense from you how that makes you feel. That, here you are, seeing kind of the best of modern Germany, but there's this underbelly. The attacker was a neo-Nazi. And so talk to me, again, probably that simultaneous tension.
I have a huge, huge hatred for the neo-Nazis. Yeah. I can't say dislike, and I know hate is the worst of our emotions, but I have it. I have it against those people. Haven't they killed enough of us? Haven't they done enough? And they're so utterly stupid. And because he couldn't kill enough, he went out into the street and killed a woman who just happened to walk by.
The 2 people he killed were not even Jewish.
Right. And then he went to a Muslim restaurant and again killed 2 people. He's just a model of the neo-Nazis. And they're growing in numbers.
Well, we always must combat anti-Semitism and racism at every turn. And I think that you are playing actually a pretty good-sized part in combating it by visiting Arnstadt and other cities in Germany and speaking with the youth. Because, look, these youth were not born. Not even their parents or grandparents were born during the horrors of the Holocaust. And you're putting a face on the horror of that time. And for that, I am forever grateful. I'm forever grateful for gracing me and our audience with this 1-hour conversation. I don't know how I made it through. And I urge our audience to read your very moving book. It's called Tears in the Eyes of My Enemy. We have been speaking with Margot Webb. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you so much for joining us on the J Report.